Joining me now, House Speaker Kirk Cox from Colonial Heights. The Speaker is up for re-election in November of 2019, along with all of the other House of Delegates members, and his speakership hanging by a thread by 2 votes, and the Republicans and his speaker team working hard to keep that majority. We're predicting right now, if the election were held today, he would do that and probably have a slight increase, and he is joining us now. Speaker Cox, great to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, John. Always great to be with you.
You put a statement out yesterday, pretty strongly worded statement, saying that, and I'm just going to read back your words and then get you to elaborate. You said the governor's call to a special session is hasty and suspect when considered against the backdrop of the last few months. Sir, can you elaborate on that?
Sure. By hasty, what I meant was that I got a call basically at 9 o'clock yesterday to tell me he was going to hold a press conference at 10. Very little detail. We certainly were not consulted. I would have obviously recommended the approach that Tim Kaine took back in 2007, that we have a comprehensive look at everything, let the legislature come back in January, and let's be thoughtful like I did with the School Safety Committee. By the word suspect it is, I'm just hoping this is not makeup once again for what's gone on over the last 4 or 5 months. Having said that, the special session has been called, and we will have our legislative agenda as Republicans. I mean, we have some ideas we think are very important to curb gun violence. And if I could, John, I think the big one is mandatory minimums. So I want to be careful with that. That's just not mandatory minimums across the board. Very select. I'll give you 2 examples. And I think the key one would be domestic violence. I mean, I think, as you know, we passed a bill this year that said if you were a second offense domestic abuser, you're going to serve 60 days in jail, giving our domestic violence victims the space and safety they need. And it was interesting. I was doing a little bit of research. There were basically 58 intimate partner homicides in 2016, and 36 of those were committed with a firearm. And so if you want to really move the needle on protecting lives, in a lot of cases women's lives, the governor just vetoed that. And now he says he's just going to veto that again. And so we want to put things like that on the table that we think really will move the needle.
What do you think the governor's objective is with this special session? Because as you also pointed out in your statement, Speaker Kirk Cox, that the governor has the right to call a special session, but he can't determine what the agenda is going to be. That's up to the General Assembly, the House, and the Senate to do that, and the leadership. So what do you think was Governor Northam's objective in calling this special session?
It's a tough question. It's always tough to, sort of read people's minds. But, obviously, I think to put it in sort of a one-size-fits-all gun control agenda, I think his statement's interesting, if we could save one life. But once again, I would go back to my statement on domestic violence. Then he could save, numerous lives. It was rushed. I mean, obviously, I think it comes to mind that politics was somewhat involved. I mean, you had all 3 statewide staying together for the first time, a lot of other Democrats. I did find it interesting that the question was not asked of a lot of the Democrats who called on the governor to resign. Why suddenly is his leadership now effective for you? Mm-hmm. And I think they saw an opportunity, which they, felt like was maybe an election year opportunity. But, once again, they've got to decide what their motives are. But we will, and I mean this, once the special session has been called, we'll give the bills due consideration through our legislative process. And I will say this, though. I hope everyone keeps asking me the question, are you going to go through your normal, process? And that's the way our process is set up. I would basically say, though, is he going to give up his veto pen and sign whatever we send him? Everyone wants us to alter our process, sort of challenging him that, will he alter his process?
When he put the statement out, he said he wanted to limit the number of clips that can be sold. Obviously, he also said that he wants to get rid of silencers or gun suppressors. He wanted to close the gun show loophole, which is kind of a misnomer anyway. And he also said that he wanted to go back to limiting 1 gun purchase a month. Are any of those proposals things that you would consider, Mr. Speaker?
Well, once again, I'm not going to say that. I mean, I think when you go into a special session, you can't say that, you're not going to consider proposals. I mean, the difference between, I think, us and the governor is that, he wants to infringe on the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, and we want to hold criminals accountable for their actions. But having said that, we're going to give all those bills a fair hearing. And, I've been very clear that, I think protecting the rights of law-abiding citizens is very, very important, and so is the Second Amendment. But I'm also going to have a fair process. I would call on him once again to have a fair process as far as considering bills we're going to send him and not give these blanket statements that he's going to veto things. I get a little bit tired of why does compromise always mean just doing what the Democrats want? And so I'd like to flip this a little bit and get some consideration for some of the bills that we think really will move the needle on violence. But to give you another example, John, I mean, you can go back to, I went through this in the 90s where Project Exile, which was a very effective program where if you were dealing drugs with guns, you got mandatory minimums, and it really cut down dramatically on crime in Richmond. Everyone remembers that. And so are we going to do effective things like that in helping victims of domestic violence? Or are we simply going to just do the litany of, gun control bills? And everyone said this, but if you look at what happened in Virginia Beach, you mentioned the suppressor, you mentioned the magazines of more than 20 rounds. Obviously, Virginia Beach, prohibits both of those. And so I think you can look through, what happened in Virginia Beach, and none of what the governor says would have affected that situation. And so, you've got to take all that in consideration.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. Good to have you with us. We are with Speaker Kirk Cox, Colonial Heights Republican Speaker of the House of Delegates of Virginia, and he put a statement out basically responding to Virginia Governor Ralph Northam call yesterday to a special session of the General Assembly to take up gun control measures in light of the horrific Virginia Beach shooting. Mr. Speaker, a lot of Republicans are saying that the governor has done this. One, they're calling it a gun grab session. That's what they're attempting to do. This is what some Republicans are saying. This is a gun grab session. And secondly, I'm getting a lot of feedback saying, look, they're losing the election going into the fall right now. So this is a political stunt in order to rile up the anti-gun forces in Virginia, get them back into their coalition, and maybe spike their turnout as they try to take over the House. Have you heard any of that? And from your perspective, do you share that view that this is basically a political effort to win votes going into the fall?
Once again, John, I don't try to get into people's motives. You can go on Democratic blogs, and I mean, it's pretty obvious for some of them. This will help gin up our base. We can use this for fundraising. I mean, you see those statements all over the place. And we do feel like, whether it be the Kathy Tron bill that basically, allowed abortion up to almost birth, and the statewide scandals and just everything they've dealt with, changing the subject certainly would be a lot of things that people would say you need to do politically. So a hastily called special session with only one item on the agenda without consulting Republicans, is not the best way to do things. So, the governor's got to live with whatever the governor's motives are. I'm not going to, say what his motives are. But, when I said suspect, I mean, certainly that's, it comes to mind that politics plays somewhat of a role in this. And that's disturbing. I think we need to make sure that we're doing, especially to your point in your introduction, this is a tremendous tragedy. And we have to make sure we're thoughtful. We pass responsible legislation. We don't pass something just to pass something to make political points. It's a very important for us to be responsible in these positions.
Mr. Speaker, I know that this is just a day old, but obviously if it's a legitimate session in order to find a way to respond to the tragedy in Virginia Beach, when I say legitimate, just like we're talking about, whether it's suspect, politicized, etc., but if this is legit, have you had any conversation with Democratic leadership in the General Assembly, Dick Saslaw, Eileen Filler-Corn? Because I would think if this was a legit come together to get something done, that they would be reaching out to you, right? Eileen would be calling you up,
Yeah,
the minority leader.
yeah. I
Dick
mean,
Saslow would be on the phone. Have you talked to either opposition leader?
I have not, and that goes back to my earlier point. We got a late phone call an hour before the press conference. We certainly weren't consulted on anything. I mean, Minority Leader Fillercorn makes a statement that we can't consider mandatory minimums because the governor says he will veto that. So I guess that's supposed to be off the board. And then she says Delegate Cox basically has ruled out considering of all legislation. And to me, that almost smacks, and I didn't say that at all. I said they would get a fair hearing. That to me smacks basically of, is the motive just to get in and then claim nothing got done, and then, to your point, to some degree, run on, with their base gun control. And I hope that's not what their motive is. But we certainly have not been consulted in any kind of bipartisan manner, and I don't think that's really been their interest.
Well, I'm going to speculate that right now it certainly appears that it is their motive because they have not contacted you. They didn't bring you into the loop. You made one suggestion. They already said that's off the table. I mean, that's not the purpose of a special session. A special session is you come together, everybody talks, you get in the room, and you try to get the best thing to respond to this, and everybody's ideas get flushed out. But right off the bat, caucus, that's the way I say it, but Eileen Fillercorn and what we call on the radio here, caucus of the corn, basically says we're not going to do A, we're not going to do B, we're only going to talk about C, and if you don't like it, hit the road. I mean, what kind of a special session is that? If it's legitimate, then you wouldn't have none of that. Saslow would have called you up, the Senate Minority Leader, and said, hey, let's get together on the phone and come up with a couple ideas that might be in the best interest of all Virginians, not just have a political sideshow, which it appears that's where this is headed to. I mean, I don't think you can get out of that conversation based on what you just said, that there's been no dialogue.
Yeah, I've been around 30 years, and I've been through a lot of special sessions. They only work if you basically have sort of worked through a lot of the details, that you've basically agreed on certain, legislative priorities. It's been well thought through. It's generally been planned 3 or 4 months in advance. I've never seen one work like this, and they don't. They devolve into, and that's what one of my statements said, it'll do nothing but be sort of political and, and that type of thing. They just don't work this way, and everyone knows that. I mean, they've been through special sessions before. And so you're right, without a holistic approach where, we're sort of working through a lot of these issues and not just throwing 10 gun control measures sort of out bill-wise, they don't work. And so once again, I mean, it's, not the best way to do it, but I really want to emphasize, having said that, I do think that, we have a responsibility to put forth what we think will move the needle on gun violence and get those bills passed and get them to the governor's desk, and that's what we're going to do. And like I said, we're going to hear all the bills as we normally do in a fair process.
Well, I know you do that in a respectful manner, but this really looks like a political stunt to me. And I'm also disturbed by the fact that it is done so quickly. We don't even know the motives of this guy, the assailant. I mean, the email just got released yesterday. I mean, we don't even know why he did this, who he is, what his history was. No one knows anything. And so we're jumping to conclusions. It is, to me, a political stunt based on the fact that they've had no dialogue with you, or I would think with Tommy Norman either. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But right off the bat, it also appears that they're leveraging. I mean, this is the thing that makes a lot of people queasy here. It's like they're leveraging a tragedy for political benefit. I mean, nobody can feel good about that. People are still in ICU in Virginia Beach, Mr. Speaker, right now fighting for their life, and the Democrats appear to be leveraging it for political gain. Really, it's kind of a sickening approach. So, but look, all this is going to get flushed out. John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with Speaker Kirk Cox, Republican, Colonial Heights. Mr. Speaker, let's get to the Justin Fairfax situation. And you had proposed to give the alleged victims their due and have a hearing in the House. You've offered Eileen Fillercorn a number of different options. You even said that she could pick all of her own options, and they declined. And now time is running out on these women. Where is that? Is that something that is ever going to come back and happen, or is it just basically done and we all move on?
Well, I certainly hope it happens. As you said, John, what we propose basically is allowing both women to tell their story. We have been very clear with the Democrats. They can have equal co-chairmanships on the committee. They can have equal, membership on any kind of courts of justice committee, that the questioning will be fair, will allow, obviously, Lieutenant Governor Fairfax to come and let's see what really happened. And they've just flatly turned us down. And the women, which we're respecting, have said they want a bipartisan process, but we can't get a bipartisan process. And so that offer stands. I think the Democrats are obviously just hoping to run the clock out on that, as they are with all three scandals. But that offer is certainly open. We've reiterated that offer many times. And so it is what it is. But, I mean, it's just very unfortunate when, we keep hearing so much about, victims. And obviously these women's stories were very compelling that, the Democrats want to do absolutely nothing on this issue.
Can we say hypocrisy? Is that a fair word?
I'll let you use that word, but certainly it is. It's to me, just certainly a contradiction of what went on with the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. So, it is what it is, but that offer, I think, is a very fair offer. It's a responsible way to do it. We will be responsible with, we know it's a serious issue. We have no interest in grandstanding. That's why we're very deliberative. And we've actually challenged them to have input on the process. If you don't like that, tell us what you would like to see in a hearing process. And they, of course, say nothing. They just accuse us of political circuses, and they get away a lot with throwing cliches and words out that really have nothing to do with what we've proposed.
More phony leadership from Caucus of the Corn. I'm sorry I got to call them out on the radio, but, I mean, it's just got to be the worst caucus ever that I've ever seen. I mean, again, hypocrisy. And here's how it's going to play out. And I'll predict it now, and then we have to take off because you have to go. Justin Fairfax is going to run for governor in 2021. And I think he's going to win. I think he's going to be their nominee. And so then they're going to have to deal with that. Fairfax is going to run for governor, and I think he's going to win right now. That would be my bet. John Fredericks Radio Network. Mr. Speaker, you got to go. I got to go. Thanks for being with us. Always
Thanks, John.
Enjoy your candor.